Hey, everybody, this is James Gunn, the writer and director of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and this is my director's commentary. Uh, Here we have our own special Marvel logo at the beginning that goes through the past few years of Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians have been my family for the past over 10 years. We were shooting the first movie 10 years ago, and it's just taken up the majority of my life. So this is the end of an era, the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie with me, at least, and with this group of Guardians. It's interesting doing this director's commentary because every time I've done the director's commentary in the past for, I've done it for at least 6, 7 films. I've always done it long after the movie came out, or at least shortly after the movie came out. This is different. I am watching this movie not for the first time. I've seen it hundreds of times, but I'm watching this movie completed for one of the first times, if not the first time, uh, and doing my commentary before the movie comes out. So I don't really know what people are going to react to, other than what people have reacted to in the test audiences. And of course, one of the things people have really reacted to is Baby Rocket. They really have liked the flashbacks and the backstory of Baby Rocket. One of the things I wanted to do with this movie was tell the story partially in present day, partially in flashback, and have the two merge. And we see that at the beginning. Great visual effect work by company Frame Store. They've worked on Guardians of the Galaxy from the beginning and helped to develop Rocket from the beginning. And they are the primary vendor for Rocket Raccoon. There's a song called Creep by Radiohead. A lot of people know it. This is a version that has not been widely distributed, a acoustic version that I've always had a great fondness for, and I love being able to put it into the movie. During the first 2 movies of Guardians, we had very joyful songs at the beginning. We had Come and Get Your Love, which Quill danced through a dark, abandoned place for, abandoned temple. We had Mr. Blue Sky, which was little baby Groot dancing through, a battle as was going on behind him. And I think that we start in a much more somber place with the Guardians. The Guardians have been together for a long time now. When we did the first movie and then we went into the second movie, there's only a couple of months between those 2 films, whereas this is basically real time from the first movie. And so now they've been together. We see characters like Nebula, here played by Karen Gillan, who has changed dramatically since we first met her when she was pretty evil, and she can still be pretty ornery at times, but she definitely isn't evil, and she's one of the more moral members of the Guardians in certain ways. And she's become almost de facto leader because, as we see in a moment, Peter Quill has been sort of incapacitated by his own emotional issues and the loss of his love, Gamora. There we have my brother Sean Gunn, who plays Kraglin, another character who's changed a lot since the first movie. Right there, we see a friend of mine named Sarah Lamy coming out with her daughter, Jasmine. And they are 2 of the characters that we created this chorus of actors within Knowhere, because we were shooting so much of this film in Knowhere. I didn't want to rely simply on background actors for the reactions. I wanted to get a group of actors in there. And so we have Sarah and Terrence Rosemore and Gio and Stephen Blackheart and different people who I've worked with in the past, just to fill it out and be able to give us some real reactions. That's real drool coming out of Chris Pratt's mouth that I asked him if he could drool for me, and he did. That is a Chris Pratt dummy. Not calling Chris a dummy, but that's actually a double. That's not a real human being at all that she's carrying. It weighed about 35 pounds, so Karen was able to lift it pretty easily. And it was created by Legacy Effects, who created all of our makeup effects in the movie. And it's a completely real, that's just a real shot, other than, of course, the CG background and Cosmo and Rocket. This is probably my favorite use of the titles in all 3 Guardians movies. Here we have a little moment between Quill and Nebula. I think she's uncomfortable because she's uncomfortable with tenderness to begin with, but she also, I think, feels quite sorry for him. This was an enormous set. I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 had the biggest sets of any Marvel movie ever, and probably one of the biggest films ever in terms of the size of our sets. So the extensions here in this shot are CGI, but all those buildings on the ground are all real, and over to the side, that's all real buildings. It goes up like 2 or 3 stories all around this gigantic set. This is all a real part of that set that took up an entire big sound stage. The music here is by John Murphy. John Murphy also did the score for my movie, The Suicide Squad, and he did the score for the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special that we shot at the same time as we shot this movie intermittently. That's the chorus, all kind of there together. If you look at that group of people, there's Sarah and Stevie and Terrence. Maria Bakalova, who plays Cosmo. She's an actor who I was a big fan of when she was in the sequel to Borat, and she played Borat's daughter. I thought she was fantastic. In fact, I think my quote about the movie talking about Maria is on the back of the CD, the hard copies of that movie that they used with their promotional materials, because I thought she was so great in it. And she auditioned, though, like many actors for this role, and I really liked this sort of excitedness she brought to it. Maria also actually did all of the motion capture for Cosmo. So she was crawling around on her hands and knees for all of these scenes, playing her in person. And she was great fun to be around, a really positive spirit, and spent a lot of time on set. I think Maria spent almost as much time on set as anybody, because any day she went, she just sat there next to the monitors all day, even when she was going home, and she would come in and just sit there and watch the movie made. She was a big Guardians fan. Here you see everybody kind of coalescing around Nebula, because Nebula has become, again, the de facto leader. And it's not something she seems to specifically want, but something she gets anyway, because she's maybe the least numbskully of all the others. They're eating fried orloni. Those orloni were made from different components, because some people, Dave Bautista is a vegetarian, so we had to make his out of a certain vegetarian type of gelatin stuff, and other people had different, food requirements. They're all very specific with what these actors eat and don't eat, and so we had to make all sorts of different orlonis. There's Will Poulter flying through the sky as Adam Warlock, who we see for the first time. Rocket. I've said many times before, this movie is Rocket's movie. Rocket is the Guardian I feel the closest to. Rocket Raccoon is the reason I did Guardians of the Galaxy in the first place, in a lot of ways. When Marvel first came to me and talked to me about this movie, here you see his injuries on his back, which are pretty bad, and we see the hints of something horrible that's happened to him in the past. It also reflects back to the first movie when Chris Pratt, Peter Quill, saw those same wounds on his back in the prison and realized there's something more to this character than was readily apparent. He's been through something pretty awful. And, we didn't talk about it much after that. We talked about it a little bit in the first movie, where Rocket talks about people call him vermin, people call him a monster. I'll get back to Rocket in a second, but here we see Nebula has a lot of upgrades, and we find out later that these upgrades have been created by Rocket. Rocket's actually helped her. He's restored part of her face so that she's not completely a machine. He's given her an arm that's much more powerful than her arm was before, and he's helped her to become a little bit more human and make the machine parts of her a little bit more dangerous. Rocket and Nebula, I think, have a special bond because they both have these terrible memories of things that have that have happened to them, they've both been experimented upon and torn apart and put back together again. So they have this special friendship that we see in the Avengers Endgame, especially, and that we see not play out so much here, except for in the results that we get to much later in the movie when we see how Nebula reacts to him being okay and how she reacts to him being not okay. Getting back to Rocket, when I first was offered Guardians of the Galaxy, I wasn't sure I wanted to do the movie, frankly. Well, I wasn't quite offered. They came to me and talked to me about it. I wasn't quite sure I wanted to do it. Um, and I was driving home from my meeting with Marvel, going from Manhattan Beach to my house in Studio City at the time. And I was trying to think about this project and how it could work. And I thought, God, it almost feels like Bugs Bunny in the middle of the Avengers. It felt kind of weird to me. And then I thought, well, wait a second. What if Rocket Raccoon was a real character? How would that exist? What would he be? And it was instantly on that drive home from that meeting where I sort of came up with this idea that Rocket had had these horrible experiments done on him, that he was born an actual little baby raccoon and was an innocent animal and turned into something he wasn't by any rights supposed to be. And that because of that, he's a completely, he's the only kind of his species. He's completely alone. And that was what drove me to do the first movie and that's been the seed of all three Guardians of the Galaxy movies for me. For me, Guardians of the Galaxy he's the secret protagonist of all three Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And in this movie, it comes more to the forefront. You see how this is all of a sort of origin story for how he became Rocket Raccoon, how he became a leader. And get to at the end of the movie. Spoilers. I hope you guys have seen the movie already. If you're listening to director's commentary, if not, you might want to turn it off and watch the movie first. Quill is still drunk here. Um, so he's not really doing a very good job. And I think that guilt is going to play at him for the rest of the movie in a pretty significant way. I think it was fun having this battle between Drax and Adam Warlock, and you kind of see the actual strength of Drax here. He's a pretty powerful guy, although Adam Warlock is almost Superman levels of strength, so it's pretty intense. Pam Clementieff she plays Mantis. She's one of my favorite people in the world, and I really love working with her. And it was very exciting for me to do this movie and the holiday special that we were shooting at the same time because it allows Mantis to more fully be herself. She was a very sort of internal character in the first movie, much more shy, much more afraid of the world. But now she's been out there for many years and she's more herself than she was before. She can be a little bit cranky sometimes. She can be very funny. She definitely can be goofy at times, but she's a really full-blooded character, and I love her. But I love Mantis. I love Palm too. It's also funny that Karen Gillan in this movie, Nebula, really gets to show a lot more of her. You're not going to see it so much in this scene, but more of her comedy chops. She's a little bit looser than she's been in the other movies. We get to see that side of her that's just a little bit looser. And it's funny to me because Karen Gillan is less like Nebula than I think almost any actor has ever been like a character they've portrayed. And by the same token, Pom Clementieff isn't very much like Mantis. I think in many ways they're more like each other's characters than they are like their own. But they're both such great actors. They play those characters perfectly. It's also Kraglin comes into to being in this movie. Kraglin started out as a character named the First Mate in the first draft of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. And little by little has become a sort of a full-fledged character in his own right. He really took a turn in Volume 2. This is Chukwudi Iwuji, who I got to know, he plays the High Evolutionary. I got to know him because he played a character called Myrn in a TV series I did called Peacemaker. He was one of my favorite actors I've ever worked with, and I'll get back to that story in a second about how he auditioned because I'll talk about this scene here. This is some work by Framestore. Now, there's nothing in this scene that is real. This is all CGI. But all of the camera angles are real. All of the acting is real. So we shot all of these scenes with the little animals in their cages with blue bars, and our 4 actors running around acting like they're characters. And so these are all the exact camera movements we use. So it feels like a real camera. And the acting is the actors acting. That's Floor, the rabbit. She's played by Michaela Hoover, who had a small bit in the first Guardians of the Galaxy uh, as Glenn Close's assistant. This is my old friend Linda Cardellini, who plays Lila the otter. Linda, I've known since we made the Scooby Doo movies together, and she played Velma Dinkley. And then a fellow by the name of Awesome, who's this incredibly talented and funny uh, uh, guy from England, played Teefs, the walrus. And the 4 of them together, these were we shot this scene, for example, on the very first day of shooting. I think that was the very first scene we shot. And like I said, shooting it is weird because we had the camera moving. I'll also say, you hear the baby raccoon there say hurts. And that is actually Noah Raskin, which is the daughter of Fred Raskin, our editor, and we were needed to get a baby's voice to do that, and she's very little. Here we see Groot reconstituting himself. He's growing back throughout the movie. Groot, of course, is now young adult Groot. Sometimes we call him Swole Groot. He is baby Groot in a youthful adult state. And I think we start to see here really that this Groot is not the same Groot from the first movie. Many people believe that the first Groot was just reborn in this new shape. That is not the case. This is a totally different Groot than the first Groot. The first Groot sacrificed himself and died and gave birth to this Groot, who is not a genetic replica of the first Groot. I have reasons in my mind why I think that's the case. I have a whole background for the character, but it is probably not ever going to be shared. But he's a different Groot. Her contact near there is, of course, as we find out, Gamora. Um, Peter Quill assumes it's a he for whatever reasons and doesn't expect to find what he's going to find. There's a Rainbow song, fantastic pop song from the 70s. I had a lot of questions about what kind of music I was going to put in this movie. People reacted so well to the first 2 soundtracks of the first 2 movies. You know, the first movie went, they sold a lot of copies of CDs, even in this day and age, which was amazing. So I didn't really know what I was going to do. I felt a lot of pressure about it. I probably felt more pressure about the soundtrack than anything. And I went back and forth. Was I just going to keep it consistent and do more 70s songs? Was I going to move on to 80s songs? Was I going to move on to all 90s songs? I knew that the songs were off of the Zune, and I believed always that the songs were chosen by Yandu Udanta, who gave the Zune to Peter Quill when he died. But I didn't know exactly what the music was going to be, and I ended up, going with a number of different time periods. Here we have Chuck again. I'll talk a little bit about that. So, a lot of really big name actors wanted to play the High Evolutionary, and I almost offered it. This was going to be enough big enough names that they wouldn't have auditioned. So, I almost offered this role to a big name actor, and then I met Chuck on the set of Peacemaker, and he just really was such an amazing actor. He's a theatrically trained actor, does a lot of Shakespeare. Um, has done a lot of theater in New York. That's his background. But I just loved working with him so much. I loved him so much as a human being that I really wanted to give him an opportunity. And so I called up Kevin Feige. I said, I've got this guy. This is who he is. I think he's really incredible. I think we should give him a chance. So we did a screen test with him. We tested him. He's the only person that tested, the only person that read for the role. And it was just this incredible audition. Uh, and so that was how he got the role. And I remember I got to tell Chuck on the day, the opening of Peacemaker, there's a dance sequence that plays before every episode over the credits that became pretty well known and viral. And on the day of shooting that dance sequence was when I told Chuck that he had the role, and he was so happy. This is Nico and Miriam. They play Recorder Teal and Recorder Vim. Teal's probably one of the more malevolent characters in the movie. Vim's not so great herself, but I think she's got a little bit more of a head on her shoulders. We spent a lot of time designing this. This is probably one of Beth Mickle's best works. Beth Mickle is our production designer. She worked with me on the Suicide Squad. I really love her, and we built the Orgoscope, and it was always kind of this concept I had that some structures wouldn't be built, according to different types of technology. They would be grown, and that is what this is, a sort of organic satellite out in the middle of space.
It's grown from living matter. The structure is surrounded by 3 impenetrable plasmic security shields. It's not going to be easy to break into this place, Star-Lord.
Doesn't have to be easy. I was a professional thief, remember? I'll jam the signals one at a time. She calls me Star-Lord when she's mad at me.
She's always mad.
This was really, so this is a part of the spaceship set that is actually a part of the spaceship. So this was the bottom floor of the spaceship on the ground. And then one level above that was the main deck where you went out and drove, had the primary flight seats. And then one level above that had the sort of perch that you could look out from the front. And every one of these different levels had different rooms. So this was a set you could walk around on, and you would feel as if you were in the spaceship itself, because it was all completely connected, completely real, and a real set. I find that, in the modern age, people shoot so many things for visual, do things with visual effects that they don't need to, like the spaceship, or they build the spaceship in like 8 different parts. But really, I wanted it all to be connected so that we could shoot continuously throughout the whole ship.
Oh, yeah, he was upset. My mom died. He screamed in my face. He pushed me out of the room.
He was probably just trying to protect you.
And I always, if you can do something practically, I like to do it practically. However, I also believe, it's not like you do everything practically. Some things are much better with visual effects. For instance, Groot here, or the gigantic Orgo Corp, the Orgoscope. Those things work better with visual effects. So it really is a balance, what you choose to do practically and what you choose to do with visual effects. And I like that, finding that magic place where people can't tell what's real and what's not. A second ago, we had a little bit of the Guardians theme playing, which is actually written by Tyler Bates, who did the score for the first 2 movies. So I wanted to have that peppered in here throughout the movie a little bit, in addition to John's fantastic score. And here we have Drax eating his Zarg nuts again, which he argued about in the Christmas special, and which he thought he couldn't be seen eating when he was in Infinity War. So he's a big Zargnut fan.
Why didn't we go through?
We did. It's not the shield.
There's my old friend, Sylvester Stallone. Again, the 3rd movie I've worked on with Sly. I did Guardians 2 with him, and then we did Suicide Squad together, and now we did this film. And, he's a guy who's been a hero of mine for a long time and been a big supporter. And having him show up again as Stakar Olgord for a little bit was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun having him on set. Just a living icon, walking around set and chatting with everybody. Michael Rosenbaum returns as Martinex. We completely changed the look of him, because I didn't like the visual effects and how they ended up in the second movie too good. And so we redesigned him. He actually looks a lot more like Michael than the original Martinex did, and he just looks more present to me. So I like him. We also have Kruger, which is played by Jared, a guy who we've worked with a lot as a stand-in on the sets, and he did Kruger for us. And then we have my friend's Molly Quinn, who's a second character she's played in the Guardians of the Galaxy series, because she was actually the woman that was being flirted with in Guardians 2 by Howard the Duck. Although maybe they're the same character. I don't know. Probably, let's say they're the same character. Why not?
What did you say? It clashes with my eyes.
Tara Strong plays Mainframe. She also played the character of Juliet Starling in a video game I did called Lollipop Chainsaw. So I've known Tara since then, and she's got this great, she can do almost any voice really, but she's got this great bubbly voice, and she has this voice that's able to sound all sorts of different levels of mechanical or not mechanical, which was really fun recording with her. Zoe Saldana is back as Gamora. Now, I actually had the most fun ever writing Zoe's character in this film, because she really gets to be the badass that she was before we met her, and there aren't any rules for her. And the rest of the Guardians have all become slightly more moral over the past few movies, but Zoe's character is not. So she kind of brings this sort of rough anger that we would have had from the initial Guardians. In fact, it's pre those original Guardians, her character, because she never experienced any of that. And a large part of this story is about her relationship with Peter Quill. Was she ever in love with him? And she wasn't. She's a different person, really, than that. I think our experiences do make who we are to some extent. And so she's not the same character, and she has found a different family. We find out at the end of the movie.
Yes. Yes, of course.
Yeah, they'll save people time. There's no Easter eggs in that stuff. Here we have, who we call Young Rocket, and it's voiced by Sean Gunn. Sean Gunn has played Rocket on set now for all of the movies. It's oftentimes his facial expressions and actions we use that we motion reference for Rocket. So he played Rocket in Volume 1, Volume 2. Now in Volume 3, the Christmas special, the Avengers movies, Thor, and I guess anything else Rocket's ever been in. But here we actually use his voice. Sean has a very, he's ability to make a very thin, small voice that Bradley Cooper's voice is almost sort of deep. And so once he becomes sort of adolescent Rocket, which it happens in a few scenes from now in the flashbacks, it's Bradley. But these two scenes here are both Sean doing Rocket's voice, which works really well.
Song. To take an imperfect clump of biological matter such as you and transform it into something perfect.
This opera song was written by John Murphy, and we put the lyrics for it over what, the sort of humanimal lyrics over it that we wrote together.
We have but a single quest to create.
This was really one of the more, the movie actually was easy to edit. This was probably the easiest film I ever had to edit. I think because it just, maybe because it had percolated for so long, maybe because I spent a year writing the script. I don't know, but it was pretty easy to edit. Shooting was difficult because we were going through the pandemic, but editing the movie was really fluid, both in the visual effects, in the editors themselves, Greg and Fred, in every way. And so we had a really fluid time. But one of the things early audiences reacted to, and maybe they reacted to in theaters too, I don't know, was, there's a dark edge to the film. And it's a dark edge that it was in the first two movies, there was a dark edge, but not quite so much. And we love all these little animals, but we also see some cruelty, on the part of the High Evolutionary, which is one of the reasons why his character works so well, because he's such a fantastic actor. He has great, he has reasons for doing what he's doing, at least in his own mind. But he's also unspeakably cruel to little animals, which is, something we hate. And so seeing shots like that where an animal is being burnt alive, even though it's only a half a second, we don't see any of the real gore involved with it, can still be intense for audiences and can be intense for young people. And so that was something that we didn't want to shy away from. We didn't want to have it not be a part of the movie. But we also didn't want to milk it at all. We didn't want to make it too much because it's already a lot. I mean, look at the little guy here he's so cute with his little metal parts and stuff. This is the moment where the high evolutionary sees how intelligent Rocket is. Now, you would think he would be really happy with that because he's trying to create a perfect society, but he doesn't seem to be that happy. And I think that's a big part of this guy's, mixed up desires, because he wants to create supposedly this perfect universe. But at the same time, he wants to be the best at everything he does. And so he's got this rivalry with Rocket, which is petty in some ways. And so I think that that's a big part of it. And as we find out, he has a lot of other, he wants revenge. His reasons for going after Rocket are not purely for the purposes he says they are. These costumes are based on the colorful costumes from 2001: A Space Odyssey, a movie I really love. I liked playing with all this sort of fake tech, the little targets that they're able to plug into, and then the suits shoot them towards those little targets. Mantis isn't as good in outer space as the other characters are, and we get to see her getting turned around a lot here. She's not as good as the others at this. We can see her get slammed in here a second she lands down. That's actually Heidi Moneymaker, who's our stunt coordinator on the film, in that costume at that time. So Heidi came in and did the actual dirty work.
Activate gravity boots and gloves. Nebula, go.
I really love how all this environment looks. I think it's really great work by the VFX team. And it's very gooey and wet looking. We built some of it, so some of it's built, but not completely. It was just more like this pink cratered surface with a thing in the background. I love Chris Pratt and Zoe Saldana in this scene. I love the two of them together, and this longing that Quill has, this sort of desperate need to find this love with the woman that he loved and who died. And she did die. That's the thing. Gamora died, and this is just another version of Gamora that really is on a different path and has a different purpose, I think, than the original Gamora did, which is what we find out at the end of the movie. Peter Quill has to accept. And I think that later what Drax says to Peter Quill is also true. I think that Peter Quill has been running his entire life, and we've set up very much so throughout the movies that Peter Quill doesn't want to go back to Earth. He does it one time shortly because the universe is at stake in Endgame. But other than that, he doesn't really ever, which was Infinity War or Endgame. And he doesn't want to go back there at all. It's where his mother died. He's been running, and he's been running through his relationships with women, with the opposite sex. He's been running in so many ways. And there is one way to look at all of Guardians of the Galaxy, as it is sort of a story about childhood trauma. And Peter Quill was a child who was with his mother at the moment of her death, and she died, and he went to this other place. He was immediately picked up by, an outer space spacecraft and taken off into space. And in many ways, I think that's a lot of people who experience trauma. They disappear and they run, and they go inside themselves, perhaps with their imaginations, perhaps whatever. And in this Peter's case, it's actual into physical outer space. And he's been running. And I think that there's a need within him to acknowledge who he is and where he came from and the family he left behind in a way that he's been unwilling to do. And that inability to acknowledge that need is sort of catching up to him at the beginning of this movie. It isn't just about Gamora. It's about without Gamora, he's not able to be distracted. Okay, there's my old buddy Nathan Fillion. He starred in my directorial debut, Slither. He's been in almost all my movies. And I'm also going to give a special shout out to Kyle MacLean there, who's his sort of assistant. Kyle is actually a stunt person. Kyle did not have any lines in the script. And every line he says in the movie, and a lot of Nathan's lines, were things that I was just throwing to them on set. So Kyle was just doing this. He's just being really funny, and he was making me laugh so hard that I kept throwing him more and more stuff and kept throwing Nathan more and more ways to mess with him. So these next few scenes, which are some of the funniest in the movie, are just, me and Nathan and Kyle messing around and Chris and everybody else. It's a gravity button, I think would be pretty nice to have in my house. Oh, well, I should talk about that actress there. That's actor. That's Jennifer Holland, who is a person that I'm married to. We actually got engaged during the shooting of this film, although we'd been together for 7 years. I'm really not a procrastinator when it comes to my work. I never procrastinate. I have everything in a movie planned out before we go into it so that we can play once we're there. But in my real life, I procrastinate a lot, which is why it took me 7.5 years. And Chris Pratt is one of my best friends. And so during this film, he started really getting on me because about, well, I don't know, 5 years ago, Chris called me up and he said, "Oh, I'm going to ask Catherine, who's now his wife, to marry me." And I said, "Chris, guess what? I think I'm going to ask Jen to marry me." That was many years ago. He's got 2 kids now, and he started really giving me a bunch of crap during this movie because I hadn't asked Jen to marry me yet, and he loves her. And I love her. So he and Catherine went out and helped me get a ring. Something got very personal in this director's commentary, but that's okay. That's what this is all about. This movie's personal. This movie is about all of us. It's about ourselves. The first movie to me is about the mother. It's Peter Quill's relationship with his mom. The second movie is about the father. It's Peter Quill's relationship to Yondu, as well as Ego, and also to some degree Rocket's relationship with Yondu, and Kragman's relationship to Yondu. And the third movie is about the self. It's about all the things we do to keep ourselves from being ourselves.
Yeah, I got one of those too.
I love Nathan talking about this guy here who's a background actor. He has no idea that's coming. There's Kyle. He's funny. He should be an actor. None of this was scripted.
Everything he does drives me crazy.
I thought you said something else.
Shut up. I swear I'm going to throttle him. I'm going to go to jail for murder. I am.
So again, this is another really cool set that was all built, totally real on the inside. The outside is obviously not outer space, and there's no clothes floating out there, but the inside is all completely real, built by Beth Mickle and her extraordinary team, Alan and Rosemary, and Dave Scott. And Dave Scott. So let me talk a little bit about the cinematography for a second. This is Henry Bram. This is, I think, my third movie I've done with Henry. And we work together very closely. Henry is our cinematographer. He's also our main primary camera person, although we have 2 other fantastic camera people. We usually have 3 cameras going. And Henry we use a small little rig that was, called the Nano. And with these small little rigs, we're able to get in very close people. We use red cameras that are very tiny, and we're able to get in very close to people and have a sort of intimate feel, but still be able to move the camera around in an organic way. And it also keeps things still. So you're able to move the camera a lot, but it doesn't feel so much like handheld camera. So you don't get that, sick on a boat feeling when you actually go to see it in a theater. And these rigs have been really, just fantastic for us. We shot the Suicide Squad, and then we shot this movie, and because of that there is a sort of different look, a little bit of a looser look on this movie than there were in the first two Guardians films, which were a little bit more staid in their approach, a little bit more spectacle film traditional, perhaps you might say.
Every single time. My name is Bleedle Snort.
Welcome to Orgo Corp headquarters. For over 300 years, Orgo Corp
Another gross Orloni the guy's eating.
Upgrades across the universe under the watchful eye of the High Evolutionary.
That warning we got today, don't those two match the description? Attention all Orgo sentries.
Here we have Daniela Melchior. Daniela Melchior was Ratcatcher 2 in the Suicide Squad. She's a Portuguese actress who is now in the Fast and Furious franchise and has had a lot of success since the Suicide Squad. I love her. She's got a very natural way of acting. And she came up with this really cool sort of alien persona in this movie, which I find interesting. And I didn't really have to give her any notes, I remember, on set, because she was very present in this sort of stiff alien character. Here we see Peter Quill, who, came to us in the first movie as this sort of lover boy that, was a smooth talker. He's getting a little bit older. It's getting a little bit sadder, a little bit more pathetic, and it's not working as well. Well, it's not at all. It's not working completely, as we find out at the end of all this. He's still kind of a jerk. This set, we built a lot of it, and then a lot of it is CG, was incredibly hard to get right. It was definitely the hardest set in the whole movie. Not this one, but the one down below, the big spaceport, because of all the white, because of all the things at different levels. It was really, and because of the largeness of it, it was hard. This set, however, I think is really cool. This is, a lot of it was built, a lot of it is real, and then the outside there is VFX by Weta, who's one of our primary vendors, a vendor that I've worked with an awful lot. And each one of those little balls there, the idea is that each one of them is a different sort of species that's been created. And each one has all the data in it about that species. And we have the data about Rocket in there, 89P13, which was this number that, we gave to him on the first movie. You can see it when he's in the lineup with John C. Reilly. Peter Quill's desperation goes so far as kind of being attracted to Nebula a little bit here. Not that she's very, very beautiful, but he's right next to the woman. He's trying to talk back into being with him, and he's ready to switch over instantly. I think it shows you sort of his fragile state of mind.
89P13. Heads up! Heads up!
A lot of that little back and forth between Nebula and Quill, too, I remember, was not completely in the script. It was, I threw at Chris. So when I direct actors, I have a microphone and I just yell out all my acting stuff, and also at the same time yell to the camera people, where we're going to move it or whatever. And so I'm doing that on a microphone while I'm sitting a few feet off stage constantly. And you have to get used, when you're with me as an actor, that I may not, if something's incredibly sensitive, I'll go in and whisper it in an actor's ear. But for the most part, everybody's in everybody else's business, and we all know what's happening and what's changing with performances and the camera. Everybody's together.
Everybody, lower your weapons or I blow this woman's brains out!
That's the plan!
You're a kitty cat.
Here we get to see Mantis use her powers in battle for the first time ever, which is kind of sad. Well, she's got to use it against Ego, I guess. But I love that dancing guy. That dancing guy makes me laugh every single time I see him, especially in this shot. I love that guy. I love Carrot Man, too, here. Carrot Man is such a sad This is just Gamora's so mean that she wants to kill the poor carrot man. Here we have the thread continuing from the second movie where Nebula's like, we start to learn that, you know, Gamora was not really the good guy in their past. Nebula was kind of the more put upon of the two children. Gamora's Thanos' favorite. She doesn't have that. She wasn't messed with that much, whereas Nebula was completely torn apart and put back together. So I needed some way to acknowledge the blip and what happened in the two big Avengers movies that these characters were a part of. So I decided to do it all in one elevator ride through a guy, Peter Quill, who's not the most, you know, educated fellow in the world. He was, you know, taken up by space pirates when he was 8 years old. So he doesn't know that much. So this is basically him trying to describe the blip, Gamora coming back and returning to the best of his ability while they're in an elevator, and probably would be like what he would actually understand about it, which is not very much. And it would be pretty confusing. But I didn't want to get too caught up in the blip because I'm afraid that if the blip actually happened, everybody in the universe would just be completely insane. So
Important information, but that is the gist of it.
they're not killing people, so you know they're electrocuting. They're just knocking them out with electric. I hope that's clear.
Everybody down on the floor, or we blow your brains out. Hey, we don't want any.
And there she does it again. That was a moment is very mean. Gamora's got no regard for many people. Reasons by Earth, Wind, and Fire. How many songs have I skipped till now talking about? This is a fantastic song that I heard once. I was at a party at Tyler Bates' house, and it came on his mix on his Sonos, and I'm like, hey, that would be a good song to put in a Guardians movie. And then I, you know, remembered and put it in this movie. When I talked about scenes that were hard to cut, I would say that absolutely this sequence was the hardest thing to cut in the movie. It was cut by Greg Daria, who's one of our two editors. And it was very, very difficult because tonally you're going from like one of the funniest parts of the movie as they're walking through and doing all this silly stuff and all these goofy hijinks with the team to this scene where Drax might die and Nebula's in dire straits as well. So going that tonal shift I found to be really difficult, and to make it still feel fluid. And we're known for our tonal shifts in the Guardians movies, you know, from the very first movie when we go from a mom dying to Come and Get Your Love playing and a guy grown Peter Quill dancing through a temple that's abandoned. We started with the tonal shifts, but this one was particularly difficult. And so I worked really hard with Greg to try to get this as fluid as we can. It also, strangely, has not helped when you're in this white environment for such a long period of time, you know, because you don't have the difference in location to help you say to the audience, oh, this is a new beat, a new place where something's happening. Ben Davis is a guy I've known from back in the day for a long time in Los Angeles. He's the big guy there. He's actually, this is his second Marvel role. He was some sort of bodyguard in Ant-Man and the Wasp. I know it was Ant-Man and the Wasp. I'm not sure exactly what his role was. But he was in that movie. I also worked with him on the Belko Experiment, a little independent film we did.
Told you she was into me.
Still a jerk. Nathan's one of my favorite guys in the world.
I'm Groot.
Yeah. That looked cool.
Next up, we have probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It might be my favorite scene in the movie, and we call it naming. And this is where these young characters, and it's the first time Bradley's voice is in the movie, is in the flashbacks as Rocket, dream about what's possible in the future. And they really are like, so many of us were as children laying down in the grass and looking up at the clouds in the sky and talking about whatever it was we imagined ourselves doing in the future. And that's who they are here. And their characters, they're so completely downtrodden and trapped and encaged. And yet they're taking charge of their own life and giving themselves a name. They're defining who they are. They're not allowing themselves to be defined by the high evolutionary or recorders Teal and Vim or whoever's trying to define them. And it's really Lila who's a leader, who's leading the charge and giving herself a name. And was really difficult to shoot this scene and edit it in a way that it worked. But we spent a lot of time with it. And then the score by John Murphy came in, which to me is one of the best pieces of score I've ever heard that I've in any film I've worked with, and one of the best pieces from the movie, which has a lot of really beautiful pieces. So that brought this moment together in this magical scene that I really deeply love, and I love these characters so much. Rocket and Teefs and Floor and Lila. There's such a bittersweet quality to the movie when you love characters as much as this, and then you know that they do not last for that long.
And me and my friends are gonna go flying together.
And here, Rocket with his dreams. And the quote that played a lot in the trailers that got pulled out, which was "Fly away together into the forever and beautiful sky," which I still love, the line.
Rocket. It really is good to have friends.
Yeah.
So that's the orb, which we now, with the information about Rocket, and we see it projected into this hologram in which the characters are able to see all the memories basically of Rocket, all the stuff he's held from them, and who he is and where he came from that he hasn't been open about, and they see it. It's like, realizing somebody you love, a close friend, has been through some sort of tragic experience, some sort of traumatic abuse that you didn't know about forever, and then you find out about, and it just makes your heart sink. And that's what they're experiencing at this point.
2H6.
I saw this guy outside of records today.
Looks like one of the high evolutionary's recorders.
The high evolutionary? The founder of Orgo Corp?
Orgo Corp is just a way to fund his experiments that lie outside intergalactic laws.
He's created whole societies.
Those are all characters from the Marvel Universe, which we've now learned that the high evolutionary has created this whole group of different characters. And there we have Gamora not understanding I am Groot. So the way Groot's voice works is that there is some sort of telepathic component to him, so that when he says I am Groot, you need to bond with him, and at a certain point when you bond with him, you start to be able to understand what he's saying. And right now that's really just, in the first movie, Rocket obviously understood him, and in these movies now, the rest of the characters have started to understand him as time has gone on, as they've gotten closer. This is a big moment between Gamora and Quill. And, I could have gone into this movie and had it be that Gamora and Quill were meant to be together, that they overcame all odds, even this being a different Gamora, because that Gamora is dead, and have them pick up their romantic spark where it left off. But I found it much more interesting to be that he's lost the one he loved and he's not really accepting it. And he's the one who's wrong in that respect. Now, she's not so great because she's pushing him around and becoming physical when she doesn't need to. But she's very frustrated because it's not her. He's talking about somebody else. You know, you are made by your experiences, and that's who she is. And then this to Gamora is a complete betrayal because her sister, who she is bonded with, seems to her like she's picking Quill and Rocket over her. You know, and really, when you think of that moment where she says that those guys are also her family, where Nebula says that, it's really touching to me, knowing where she came from. It was such an evil character at the beginning of the first movie.
Found him on the outskirts of the first shield. Pirating supply ships.
I do appreciate this, good sir.
And I appreciate your generous contribution to the Orgo Century Retirement Fund.
So in the chair there is a guy by the name of Gerardo who did, I've worked with on 2 other movies, actually. He plays Fitzgibbonok. There's a Fitzgibbon in every one of my movies, and this time it's Fitzgibbonok. And he was also in The Suicide Squad, and he was actually in the movie Super. But he's a great guy, and his pet is named Blurp. So Blurp is, you know, I wouldn't call Blurp necessarily an important character, although, you know, I have claimed on Twitter that he was the most important character to the future of the MCU. I really like this little animal, and Blurp is what we call a furry Fisaki. In the first movie, there was a creature that people were betting on that was eating Orloni on a table. And that was a non-furry Fisaki. This is the furry version, who's a lot cuter than the non-furry version. But as some people know, originally in the script for Volume 2, I had Adam Warlock. I had the character of Adam Warlock show up at Volume 2, and it became too complicated with too many characters. And so I removed Adam Warlock, and I just kept the character of Aisha, who's played by Elizabeth Debicki in both movies, and is a lot of fun to work with. And in that movie, in the script for Volume 2, Adam Warlock had a cat that he found. He killed a guy. He felt guilty about it, and the guy had a cat that was sort of like upset that the guy was dead, and so he carries around this cat for the rest of the movie. Well, that's what Blurp originally was, but in between the script of 2, which I took out Adam Warlock, and writing the script of 3, there was Captain Marvel came out, which had the cat in that movie, which has a big role, and I know has a role in the upcoming Marvels film. And so I had to change Blurp to something besides a cat because it seemed too repetitive. Do you realize by the Flaming Lips, this was the song we actually used in our very first trailer that was never released to the public, that maybe it'll come out at some point online or on the DVD, which we did for San Diego Comic-Con, where we showed the first ever footage of the movie and the first ever trailer. This was an incredibly emotional experience for us at Comic-Con. It was as we were all together because we knew this was the end of an era. We have really become close, the Guardians. All of us, like family, and we talk all the time. And to be thinking that we're all going to keep working together. We love each other, and I'll work with all of these actors separately. But as a group, as the Guardians, this is the end of the road for a lot of us, including me. And it was a lot of tears at that San Diego Comic-Con. You know, I didn't know Chris Pratt when this started, and today he's one of my best friends. We talk all the time. Tom Clementieff is also a really close friend of mine, Batista and Bradley Cooper and Zoe and Karen, all of them. You know, Chris, you know, I told you about how we got married, how Chris helped me to get married, and Chris actually gave a speech in my wedding. He was one of the speakers at my actual wedding itself. He killed. Much better than his performance in this movie.
And also stupid looking and flappy. Flappy? Because her skin is made of a leaf. Metaphor.
Is it?
Yesterday, I made a poop shaped like a fish.
And here we go back to Drax at the beginning of Guardians Volume 1. We realized he was had a very difficult time understanding metaphors or analogies or anything like that. And now he's a little better at it. So he started to kind of get it down, but not enough to really make sense of it.
Sire! Sire was in the middle of his treatments when we had a breakthrough with batch 92.
Perhaps then we should resume tomorrow. Yes?
No, resume tomorrow! No! A13! Oh, ooh. There you are.
This is a pretty dark scene, actually, in which we see that Rocket's knowledge is capable of creating this great life. Like this is not the High Evolutionary's creation here. This is Rocket's creation. He's the one who figured out how to, make these characters, these creatures and their transformations not be angry and be more pleasant and non-attacky. Some of these animals are real. Most of them are CGI. That's completely CGI kangaroo, CGI monkey. The rabbits and the turtle are real. You're allowed to have some animals on set, and other animals you can't have and get the Humane Society's approval, which I understand because they really care about animals and their welfare on set, and so I get it. I love Chuck in this scene. It's so.
Made you! How did you know?
Yeah, this is, we see that the High Evolutionary he's a very imperfect character. This is really seeing where he's frayed. He's getting these treatments, which I don't know exactly what they are, but they're I think he's trying to improve himself. It obviously makes him a little bit inebriated, and who knows how much of it is more of a sired up for that than anything else. And here we see he's getting what he wanted, but he's angry at the source. And this moment is just the most sad in the movie, practically. Cobbled together by fat-fingered children and like mocking the fact that he thought he was going to go to the new world, that he was ever going to survive. He's just a step. We go back to what Rocket said in movie 1 when he gets into the fight with Drax and almost kills Drax. And says, he never asked to be made. He's a little monster. He didn't ask to be a little monster. He didn't ask for any of this, and yet he was bequeathed it. One of the things I was very careful with Rocket, and one of the things I was very careful with Rocket as he moved throughout the movies that weren't Guardians movies, and the Russos and Taika were very understanding of, was I never wanted Rocket to do anything that was empathetic towards anybody but his close clan. It's a very sort of 14th century morality where the lives of those that are close to you matter, but nobody really matters outside of that. I don't think he feels empathy for characters other than his friends. And he never really does anything heroic in any of the movies that isn't just to save his friends. With his friends, he's very heroic. He'll put his butt on the line at any time, but he will not do it for someone else, unless it's what he's going along with the rest of the group. And that lack of a wider empathy is really what the three movies are about to me. It's the education of Rocket, the education of Rocket Raccoon coming into a full being. Little High Evolutionary stuffed animal that he's obviously given out to the humanimals. The humanimals language is a real thing. So I created a humanimals language. I actually spent much more time than I probably should have creating this humanimals language. And there's a whole grammar to it and everything, and maybe we'll release some of it online or whatever. But it's a real thing, and it's not a huge language because it only has the 150 words I needed for this movie in it, or however many words there are. But it is a language with its own grammatical structure and way of working. A lot of these humanimals are actors I've worked with before. We shoot in Atlanta. This is the fourth movie I think I've shot in Atlanta, and I kind of reuse people that I work with.
Hey! Ow! Ow! Come on! There's no free. Hey! Hey! Groot! Full kaiju! Not full kaiju!
Somewhere there's a video of me sticking out my tongue like that that I sent to Weta to get right. Darla Delgado is the name of the woman who plays a vampire Batwoman, and the actor who plays that character. And I just think she's fantastic in the movie. I love everything she does. She's so believable and somehow beautiful, despite kind of having this monster makeup on. She's just so good, and she just really is a fun person to be around. And Randy Havens, who plays her husband, is a guy who I've known. He's on Stranger Things. He plays the science teacher on that show. I also love this interior design of this spaceship that Beth Mickle made. You know, we actually didn't cut too much from this film. I mean, the first cut was probably around 3 hours, so we cut a half hour out of the overall film, but we didn't cut many scenes. It was more just trimming and tightening and cutting out the fat and trying to make it move quickly. But we did cut one scene in the with Warlock and Elizabeth Debicki in that gold spaceship that kind of stinks because it's such a cool set. I love it. I love these pictures they took of the family posing together.
Idiot.
This was a fun scene on the page, and then it was an even funner, more fun scene to shoot. He's saying thank you louder as it understands them better. But I love Chris's performance. I love, the whole cast in this scene. Karen and Dave and Palm are all, and not to mention Randy and Darla are both so good. I also, again, it's another scene I got to point out the production design because it's just so good. And one person I haven't talked about, and I'm, feel bad, is Judiana Markovsky, who does our costumes and has done the costumes for the past few movies for me. And I love the Guardians uniforms. These are the uniforms that are based on the uniforms from the comics, but she really gave them a texture and a livability and a reality to them that is fantastic. And that's all Judiana and her team who just did just fantastic work with these costumes. I love them. Groot in the background there is adjusting a painting of sort of a pug-looking dog man. And strangely enough, I have that actual painting up in my house in Aspen. In fact, I have many of these little knickknacks from here that are on the wall, that are, those little statues around. I have them up in my house in Aspen. They gave them to me at the end of all this. I think I took Chris's drawing too, but I lost it. That's actually Chris's drawing. And it's pretty funny to see when he drew it. He told me he was actually trying to draw as well as he could. I don't know if that's true or not, but he claims that's the case. Not an artist, Chris Pratt. There they see the arete in the beginning. Many. Lolo means many. Motios means recorders. AO means no. I love Randy just pulls it out at the end. Randy was also in the Suicide Squad, but he was one of the people that had a star on his face. So he had like one line when he was down in the pits looking up at Joel Kinnaman as he's walking over him. This is One of the moments I imagine will get some attention when the movie comes out because Chris Pratt drops an F-bomb in a Marvel movie. And this was not, that was not in the script, but I did ask Chris to say it on set to add the F word to the line. And we watched it, and it just was funnier that way. So we kept it in the movie. I remember talking to Kevin Feige when we were going over the first cut of the movie, and he said, I said, what do you think about? I thought it was the one thing that Disney might come down on. They didn't. Nobody ever mentioned it. But I talked to Kevin about it, and I said, what do you think about that? Because I value his advice. I don't want to turn off people too much or anything. And he said, well, if you want that to be your legacy, well, then, that's fine. The first F-bomb in a Marvel movie. And I said, Kevin, who do you think you're talking to? It's me. And so we kept it in the movie. It actually gets in the test screenings. It got the biggest laugh in the movie, or one of the 3 or 4 biggest laughs in the movie. And that's a hard thing to say no to, a big laugh. Let me tell you, when you're doing a movie and you get big laughs at something, and sometimes you have to. Every once in a while, you're making a movie and something gets a big laugh at the wrong time or in the wrong way, or it's a funny thing when you really should have an emotional beat going through from one scene to the next, and you have to take out a laugh. But if it works, then you want to keep it. Alice Cooper here is this is his version of I'm always chasing rainbows. Alice Cooper is one of my heroes. He's a guy whose music I really love, but I also think he means a lot to me as a person. Like all of the Guardians, I felt like an outsider as a child, and I would get an Alice Cooper album and I'd put it on, and even though I was, being raised in the semi-rural part of Missouri, and I felt like an outcast. I didn't feel like anybody there. I would listen to his records and go, God, there's somebody out there as weird as I am. And that was Alice. And he made me feel a little less alone. And I learned the power of music. And I'm really grateful to have his song and have been able to squeeze him into the Guardians franchise at the last minute. Here we have Kai Zen as Fila. As some of you may know, Fila becomes a major member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. She's an important character in the Guardians comics. And Kai is an actress. We auditioned many, many young actresses, and she is the most delightful person in the world and would be up there with one of my favorite people on this planet. Really incredibly talented and sweet, sweet, sweet young girl. And that shot was actually pretty hard to get, those couple of shots, because you have to shoot the shot with her running, of course, separately. You have to have it separate, but you have to have it at exactly the same angle as the moving shot that you're shooting. When we're shooting just the circle and Chuck standing there. It was difficult because of that. It was difficult because of giving the impression that Chuck was actually looking at her, and it's running in a circle. Normally, I'm very, very strict about eye lines. I don't do what is known as crossing the line, which filmmakers understand. It's cutting from one side of the line to the other. I guess it's hard to explain on a director's commentary, but you can look it up online, see what crossing the line is. And I almost never do it. I'm very, very strict about it, especially I think in action sequences, it helps you. And there are times when you can break the rules and cross the line, and that's okay. But for the most part, I don't. And when somebody's running around in a circle, then it makes not crossing the line very difficult or even impossible. Here is really, now this is the belly of the beast of the story, really. This is the darkest hour of all 3 Guardians movies. We find out the truth about what happened to Rocket. What is it that caused this little innocent character, who's obviously so loving and so full of heart and so innocent, what is his origin story? This is his origin story. This is what turned him into the nasty little creature we find him as at the beginning of the first Guardians movie. And Guardians 3 is a story of him fully becoming himself. And so we see this where Rocket thinks he can outsmart the High Evolutionary. He thinks that he can get out. He thinks he can fly a spaceship, which he's excited about because that's one of his obsessions. And we also see that he's a little bit of a kleptomaniac. He's been stealing these things from around the spaceship for a long time, obviously, and putting them in his cell there. That part of him is, I'm not sure we're ever going to get away from stealing Rocket completely.
To get us all out of here.
I think the name of the song, one of the songs is Hooray Time For, I think it's the name of this one is Hooray Time Forever. Actually, a lot of the swag. So when you're on a movie, all the different departments make T-shirts or hats or book bags or whatever. And on one of the departments' T-shirts said Hooray Time Forever on it. When I look at Lila, I love seeing how much Linda Cardellini is in her performance. Just that little nod there, the little twitches of her eyes, the little things that Linda did that are completely a part of that otter, who is so cute and so beautiful, and just it's really neat to see. It really captures Linda's spirit. I did struggle with some of this a little bit. Boy, these visual effects by Francois are so amazing. I struggled with it. It's so dark here. I mean, the first part is dark, and the second part is even. I mean, it goes from one dark thing to the next. But this moment is just heartbreaking, you know. And I think, you know, you see Rocket here in a second, and now the screaming, the facial expressions, and everything were based on what Sean did on the day, and it was just amazing. The scream itself is Bradley Cooper at his most chilling. And when we recorded the scream, it was unnerving, really, the sense of loss. I remember one time this moment right here. Maybe the saddest moment in the
Q12 and P13.
yeah, I get emotional now even seeing the moment. It's really chilling, the sadness, the tearing away. I was in my 20s, and I was living with my girlfriend at the time in New York City, and I remember her mother passed away. She was very close to her mother. And I remember her shouting as if a part of her had been torn away from her body. And then this piece of dirt who mocks that agony. And you kind of get like what Rocket's doing. This is the shift. This is where he turns into something else. Like earlier, High Evolutionary says to him, you know, we want them to be nonviolent and friendly like you. And obviously, this is not nonviolent. And I think this is the thing that he's haunted by. Actually, Lila, he was haunted by, he let her out, but he was doing something good there. But this moment is the moment that haunts him. This is what has caused Rocket to turn off the rest of the world. And we see it happen in a moment, in a second. But he is responsible for this. He feels like he killed, you know, the people or characters, whatever, animals he loved the most, that were all of his heart, Teefs and Floor, because he became violent, and his rage in this moment became more important than, you know, protection or logic or reason or any of it. And that's where I think he's been for all of the time. That's the space that his emotional life has lived in since this time, has been in this tremendous guilt, so much guilt that it's become something sort of mean, something sort of cruel. I mean, he's the guy that wants somebody's arm, right? And look at his friends that he killed. What do they have? They have, not real arms. They have artificial limbs. And this is the moment where we see him go from being the innocent raccoon to the Rocket that we knew at the beginning of Volume 1. Another hard shift here for me was cutting from that to this, which seems to work okay. But it goes from something kind of funny, although I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Drax didn't kill that guy, but I'm kind of not 100% sure. Drax and Mantis have their own problems with morality at times. They're not sure exactly what's right, as we see in the holiday special where they kidnap Kevin Bacon to give him as a gift to Peter Quill. Mantis, still gullible, as always. Another beautiful set designed by Beth Mickle and her crew. All the bottom of that is all real, and then when you go up a little bit higher, it's an extension, a visual VFX extension. I can't tell you where that extension begins because I can't tell. That's how good it is. So it's really fantastic work from both. It's a great example of a production design team and VFX working together. Our visual effects supervisor is Steph. Our producer is VFX producer Susan. I worked with them on the first Guardians, and I really love them. They're great partners to us on this journey, and they work great with the other departments. One of the things I like to do as a director is I get people together a lot because I don't think that there is always a really specific hard line between one department and the other. Production design and costumes need to work together, and luckily Judy, Anna, and Beth are best of friends and can really, they share all their ideas because they have to be on the same page all the time. VFX and cinematography and production design are not completely different. There's not a hard line between them, so they all have to work together. They all have to have the same ideas, and if there's conflict, that's okay. We're going to have conflict all the time, but you need to work through it and step through it in an adult manner. And I've gotten a crew around me now of people who I've worked with so much that it's second nature. I'll talk about War Pig. That was the character that just attacked Gamora. I think she's a really cool and creepy design. She's played by Judy Greer, who is truly one of my oldest friends. I think we've known each other since '95 or something like that. And she was in the second movie I ever wrote, which I acted in. She actually played my romantic interest, Deadly Girl, in a movie called The Specials we did together, which was my first ever superhero movie, made for about under $1 million back in 1998. So Judy, of course, was in Ant-Man. Linda, of course, was in, Hawkeye, and plays his wife. So some of these voice actors we've used have been in other things, but I wanted to pick the right person for every role, and I knew Judy's voice was. You look at War Pig, you don't imagine Judy's voice coming out. And I wanted to go against type. Blurp, a little scream there out of Blurp. Blurp is voiced by Dee Bradley. Dee Bradley actually did the voice for Eagly in the series of Peacemaker, which is Peacemaker's pet eagle. Here we have a moment with Gamora where she sees Rocket lying there. Now, we've established that Gamora is not the most benevolent of characters. She's not the most altruistic of characters. but I still think that when she's actually faced with this rocket dying, leaving him there to die, she does the right thing and she takes him, which I think is a pretty cool thing. We see her sort of spirit that is very much like the original Nebula coming out, that she just can't leave him there to die. She takes him with herself, which is really cool. This was complex stuff to shoot because we are shooting on one location, which is the back of a spaceship, and then another location, which is the actual suburbs of Atlanta. There's a little moment here where she sees Kangaroo Woman and her child, and they are obliterated. And of course, he's worried about Mom. Blurp, you know, when he's nervous, he can't quite hold his bladder. I think that might have been that. I like the effect of them falling towards the camera there. They're both completely CGI in that. I mean, we use stuff from Zoe's face. We track her face going down as if she's falling in slow motion, very, very slow motion. We just have her do it very slowly. And then we, kind of put that face on the CGI body of Gamora. We have digi-doubles, what's called digi-doubles for all of our characters, where we, make a perfect version of them in digital. And it's gotten to a place where you can do it without being noticed. Now, I would never use it in a medium shot or a close-up shot or even like, a full shot, but you use it when you're a little bit distant and you got to have them do something that's not physically possible for a human being to do, like jumping or falling too far a height or anything like that. I think we see really a little bit about Nebula's spirit here, where she's instantly taken up by the desire to save Peter Quill and run towards this thing, even though the world is falling apart. She's going to go save Peter. And it really is this love between the two of them. They really have this deep friendship that I think we see in this movie. One of the hard things about shooting a movie sometimes is you shoot a scene like this where everything falls apart and suddenly there's all this wreckage and there's a second in between them. But when you shoot a movie, this is, a week or 2 weeks between the two scenes that we're shooting. This is Octo Groot, what we call Octo Groot. There's two scenes we're shooting because we have to shoot the scene with the wreckage, and then we have to shoot the scene earlier without the wreckage. And so you got to have everything all work together in the same way and have all the same background extras and all the same stunt people and everybody there. So it has to be relatively well planned out. We get to see a little bit more of the extent of Groot's powers in this movie than we did in the first two movies. We saw him, stretch himself out and grab people and get bigger and smaller, and not smaller, but get bigger and all that sort of stuff. But we didn't get to see him become an Octo Groot, or in the second we'll see him fly, or kind of try to fly. He's not really good at it. As High Evolutionary explained just a few minutes ago, he has protected himself after being attacked by a rocket and learned to control gravity. So although before that he was very much focused on creating the perfect creature, he's turned some of that intelligence back onto himself and is can control gravity, which also Rocket has some ability to do because he's made those gravity boots that we see him walking with at the beginning, and we see the characters use them with their spacesuits. Here we see Groot try to take wings, try to take flight with wings. Now, he can't really fly, but he is able to use them as sort of a parachute. He's in the background right here if you look to the side. Yeah, there he is. People miss that. I love, you watch this movie with an audience and about 10% of them see Groot flying back there. It's kind of fun. The Mowgli's, San Francisco is the song that's playing there. Actually, a song that played at my wedding. Here we have that is a double of Nico. That's created by Legacy, who created the Quill double at the beginning of the movie. And it's a fantastic replica. It was pretty creepy on set. I have a bunch of Nico is laughing his butt off as we were taking lots of pictures of him with that character. This is sort of the old rolling boulder shot from, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where these two guys for a second get to run away from the spaceship that's about to plow them down, which Gamora is able to stop at the very last second. A lot of pieces in this one. Here we see Drax is sort of empowered by his love of Mantis. Not romantic love. People sometimes think they're romantically in love. I don't think they are at all. I think it's very much brother, sister are just buddies. They're just really good buddies. And Nebula sees all the kids in cages. The experiments of the high evolutionary, and this sort of starts them on their journey. There's sort of three tiers in the story. There's the first part of the story in which the characters are trying to save Rocket's life. Everything is about saving Rocket's life, and in this scene, you'll see that they do. And then it's really about them trying to save these guys' life, and then next it's about saving the kids and the animals. This is really about Nebula to me. This is about Nebula not being. This is a lot of information comes out in this scene, but Nebula is unable to accept anybody else's weaknesses because she doesn't accept her own. And Palm is so wonderful in the scene.
It's not his body, stupid. Liability. He makes us laugh, and he loves us. How is that a liability? All you care about is intelligence and competence.
Not sure I appreciate this defense.
He has sadness, but he's the only one of you who doesn't hate himself. So I don't care if he's stupid.
I like that line. He's the only one of you who doesn't hate himself. And I think that that's true. I think that they all have a lot of, problems with how they view themselves. Nebula, she's really not forgiving herself for any of the shit she's done in her life. And then, Quill has problems with how he views himself. Rocket has major problems. We hear it through Creep at the beginning of the movie. They all have these major issues with themselves. Drax is the only one, I think, that even though he's had, trauma, it was when he was an adult. So I think his personality was a little more, stabilized by the time he had that trauma. And he's just a little bit more of a happy-go-lucky guy than the other characters are, even though he has that deep sadness because of having lost his wife and his daughter. And a lot of the fulfillment of that is this movie. It's not the revenge of killing Thanos. It's about how is he able to acknowledge that he, where he belongs in this world. And we find that out by the end of the movie. Another great piece of score for me by John Murphy. Just really outdid himself, and more fantastic visual effects by Framestore. In this sort of afterlife scene, it's the thing that people see now. Maybe it's just a part of your brain. Maybe it's a real peering into another world. I don't know. But that's what Rocket's experiencing here, this going into the light and dying. And he does die here. Rocket does die in this scene, and he comes back to life because of what happens. But to me, this is the crux of the movie. This is the reason I wanted to create the movie. This and the ending with Rocket and the baby raccoons. They're the reasons I wanted to really do a third Guardians in a lot of ways, and why I felt like I needed to do it. Little Flora waving with her little spindly arm is cute. I love how these characters came together because they are, they're scary in a way, but they're not. They're so cute, even though they have all this work done on them, this graphic stuff. This is the moment where he gives up. Like, it's that moment of giving up and walking towards the white light. And then Chris really here is Zoe too. Really emotional. It's for me. And that body is just so sad.
Quill.
No!
Quill.
I'm not gonna lose him.
He's gone.
I'm not letting him go!
Groot also, I think it's important to remember that Groot reacts to all these characters as if they're his parents. This is really so much of it. He thinks he doesn't have any purpose in life. He doesn't exist for a reason. And that's Lila acknowledging whatever our higher power might be, whatever we believe is our higher purpose in life. There's the hands, which were high evolutionaries, and then the hands that guided the hands. And that can be God. That can be whatever you look at it as. And again, that's Lila directly sort of talking to Rocket, who's thought of himself always as the outskirts. He's not the center of his own story to himself. And so when she says, the story has been yours all along, you just didn't know it. It's about you. It's not about somebody else having created you and defined who you are. It's about you defining who you are. And that's what the movie's about. And that's also saying to us, the audience, in a way, the story has been Rocket's all along. From the beginning, for me, it hasn't been Peter Quill's story primarily. It's been all of their stories. But it is Rocket at the center of it all, more than anyone. This is about him. This is about him becoming the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy, of finding his love and empathy for all beings in the universe, of becoming a true leader. This is Rocket's story. I was talking about Groot and Groot's empathy, Groot's feelings towards these characters, and I think it's very important to remember that Groot thinks of all these characters as his parents. They're all his dads and his moms, and they raised him from the time he was a little baby. And some of them more than others. I think that, Quill and Rocket especially are his dads. And in fact, when in the script for Infinity War, when Groot disappears, teen Groot at that time, or young adult, whatever you want to call him, teen Groot, child, adolescent Groot, disappears, he reaches out to Rocket and he says, I am Groot. And there's a script for what he says there, and what he's saying there is dad. He's calling Rocket dad as he disappears. And I think that's how he looks at these characters. I think a lot too, Peter Quill. We see Peter Quill at the end of Guardians 2 take on the role of father, and with baby Groot, with him on his lap, and he accepts that responsibility. And I think you see that relationship here between Groot and Quill. Those days we shot in these cages with all these children were really fun. Like, this day was fun as she's marching around and all the kids are hanging off of Nebula. But at the same time, man, was it noisy in there. But they were great kids, just such great kids to be around. We had a lot of fun.
You'd like to joust, would you?
Go to hell, you sick son of a bitch. You killed all of those people.
As I will your friends.
I'm sending you the coordinates.
They will die unless you...
Bring me what is mine! Screw you, you stretch-faced RoboCop-looking Skeletor wannabe, purple nurple piece of... He hung up.
You think?
Here we have my version of dogs playing poker, only with, which we also call the cameo table. We have Steamy Blue Liver, played by Stevie Blackheart, who we have in the first movie playing the dispatcher. He's playing that same character here. He actually plays the character of Brawl in the second movie, so he's been in all the movies. We have Lloyd Kaufman, my old boss from Troma Studios, who was the guy who first hired me in the entertainment industry. He's the Pink Man, my brother Sean. Howard the Duck, played by Seth Green. And Christopher Fairbank, who plays the broker from the first movie, having his return. He's a guy we loved working with. And then Beezer Mikatakalack, played by Rhett Miller, the lead singer of the old 97s, who was in the holiday special and sang all the music, and we wrote songs together for that.
That rancid word.
I'm merely wondering whether it might be wiser to go directly to the new colony and not engage in unnecessary conflict.
They can rewire.
Here we see Vim talking to High Evolutionary about what they should do. And High Evolutionary, you know, she's right, of course. They should just go and let go of it. But he won't. And, you know, why will he not let go of it? She calls him on this later. Is it because he really wants to do the best for the universe? Or is it because he hates Rocket and wants to get revenge? And he feels like he lost. He feels like he lost his status, you know? And I think that really drives him. He's the one who wants to be in charge. He wants to be the smartest. He wants to be everything. And yet this little animal got something off of him. He beat him. And he's got that sort of just incredibly, you know, monolithic pettiness, really. So this thing that they're in is like a feeding tube. Like that's what it's supposed to be. So the food comes down in the bottom of this thing, and they throw all the food down in there. They lift this up, and then the abelisks, who we see in a minute, come in to eat it.
Peter will be trying to get to the spaceport. He doesn't know about the children.
No! We need you to let all the other children on board know to stay away from the starboard walls.
Here we see Nebula does not know how to handle children, obviously. So in the humanimal language, you don't say, you know, like very good friend. You say jub jub. You say the word twice. Jub means friends. Jub jub means like very good friends. And the way you say something is a more extreme version of what the word is. The way you say very is by saying the word twice. So eo eo is more expressive than just saying eo, which is no. It's no, no.
You're scaring them.
I think this is really the moment for Drax, this is a moment for Nebula as much as it is for Drax, because this is a moment where she sees that Drax is really someone special, and she's been misjudging him the whole time. She sees who he really is. He's a dad. And that's the thing he lost out. That's the thing he should be. And every one of those little kids just love Dave Bautista too, just in the same way that they love him now. But they love the whole cast. The cast was really fun with them. This day was a lot more manageable and fun because we didn't have 100 kids in cages. It was just the little group of our primary actors there. It was more manageable. Boy, the people that looked over the kids, the teachers and the guys that brought them in, and they had a really good way with these kids. I think that they all had a really fantastic time working on the movie.
Jub jub.
Jub jub.
Yeah, jub jub. They're going to tell the other kids to stay away from the starboard wall.
Why didn't you tell us you knew their language this whole time?
Why didn't you ask?
This could be futile, Quill. He's too powerful.
Well, I guess we'll die trying.
What is dying trying going to accomplish?
Or we can just give him the badger.
Our thing is dying.
Rocket's been called a lot of animals. He's been hamster, badger, rabbit, fox, just nearly everything you can think of. I go back to watching the very first cut of the very first movie we screen tested, and it actually didn't go so well. People didn't know even what animal Rocket was because it was such an early stage of visual effects. And I remember all of the cards calling him a fox. the fox does this, the fox does that. They had even less of an idea of what Groot was because that was completely unknown to them. They were just confused by the movie as a whole because of, they didn't know what it was. The tone to them was strange, the combination of humor and pathos and drama and laughter. And great space, great visual effects by Weta, just these wonderfully dynamic space battle shots, which go back to, I love Rocket singing along to stuff. He's obviously had a love of the music on the Zoom. Rocket's, sort of picked up on Quill's love of American pop music and loves it just as much. And we see that in the movie as he keeps taking the Zune from Quill at the beginning, and then at the end, the fact that Quill knows this and gives it to him. That's one of Kraglin's real hero moments. He gets a couple in the movie. Steamy Blue Liver gets his little hero moment here.
Second barrel. Third barrel. Fourth barrel.
And they're telling him to get away from the walls like Nebula said they should do so that they don't get blown up. I think of this scene as sort of circle versus square, cube versus sphere. And we're the circle. That is Natalia Safran, who plays the controller. That was incredibly uncomfortable makeup. I had this concept that, we would have this woman, this animal that was built into the ship, that was a part of the ship itself, and that was who would fly the ship, is this controller. But incredibly, again, complex work by Legacy. Legacy had more applications, more makeup applications for this film because of all the humanimals, especially, than any movie in the history of filmmaking. We have more than the last movie that had the record was The Grinch, and we had more than they did. So we do like our visual effects, but we also like our practical effects quite a bit here on the Guardians team.
Rocket, Groot, go! Get inside that spaceport.
We're about to see what the Hellspawn are. The Hellspawn are these sort of monsters. The Behemoth is a Hellspawn, one of the main monsters we've seen. Warpig was a Hellspawn, and these are like sort of the other Hellspawn, which are these crab creatures, which Weta, who created them, called them Crusties. That was some hard visual effects to get that shot of him flying through those windows. You never know what's going to be difficult. I love these shots of them running up on this thing, though. It's really important for me in a movie that you don't just have a giant battle scene with no meaning to it. So every one of these little pieces of battle here needs to flow together with the other pieces of battle. And it also needs to have a character reason for being. So in this movie, we see each of these characters sort of confronted with their situation. And here we have, they're all in their down part here, right? So it's stuff that's the bad part for our protagonists. Here we have Mantis, who needs to find her way to defeat these monsters, which is through her heart and her compassion, which is very different from what we're used to seeing in movies. And with Kraglin, we need to see him have faith in himself and learn how to control the arrow, but also, rectify his relationship with Cosmo, the dog. With Peter, we see him outsmarting the characters with the space stuff, and then we see Rocket doing basically the same thing. But this is Weta. These are Obelisk. Obelisk is the animal that they're fighting at the beginning of Guardians Volume 2. So that was them fighting this monster, all of them together fighting this monster and really almost being killed. He was pretty difficult to face. And they had all their stuff with them. Their weapons and everything else. And here it is, the three characters have to fight these abelisks with nothing. And we know that most likely they would be destroyed. But one of the sad things that I've always said about the opening, I said it as we were making the movie of the opening of Volume 2, is that Abelisk just wants to play. He's not trying to kill them. He's just coming down and he's trying to play with them, and they misunderstand it and they kill him. He's trying to get some batteries too. He wants to eat the batteries. But I don't think that Abelisk really knows what's going on. Now, whether that's true or not, I think I have to go back and see the movie.
One more step and this weird thing gets it.
Don't be rash.
Will Poulter trying to get up. This was one of the last shots we did shooting in the movie, was that shot of Will Poulter trying to get up out of that metal after we were nearly done. And here we think we have there's something there between Gamora and Quill. There is, even though, they're not going to end up together and they don't belong together. I think that's the moment where Gamora looks at him, and I talked to Zoe about this, where she looks at him and she goes, God, you know what? I kind of see what, my other version of myself saw in this guy. He's pretty cool. He's pretty cool. And again, I think this is really this beautiful moment for Mantis with this beautiful score, again, by John Murphy, where the way to defeat these monsters is to understand that they're just scared. They're just scared of these people. They don't eat human beings. They don't eat, meat. They eat batteries. That's how they survive. And she tunes into him and sort of sees that. I think her touching him and her antenna going, her antenna goes bright when she uses her powers. I don't think she's calming him even. I think he's calming because he's touching her. And she's being kind to him, which he hasn't ever known. But she's feeling his pain at this point. Her powers go on when she feels something that someone else is feeling, or changes what someone else is feeling. And in this case, I think it's the first of the two. I don't think she's changing anything. And here, of course, we have the return of my old friend, Michael Rooker. He's been in every single one of my movies in a role, and having him not appear in Guardians 3, well, it was possible and could have happened. And at first, I just had his voice show up. I did, but I said, you know what? I think Kraglin might see him there, reaching to him from the spirit dimension. And the story between Kraglin and Yondu is, this comes to a fruition because if you remember, Kraglin betrayed Yondu really poorly in the second film. And I think that, I don't know if he ever got over that. I also think that Kraglin has sort of suffered from, prodigal son syndrome, because prodigal son is Peter Quill, and that's really Yondu's favorite son. And Kraglin was the one who was always there and just sort of bitter about it because he never felt like he got the attention that Peter Quill did. And that's that moment of forgiveness for himself there. Here we see Cosmo using her telepathic powers, and we see what a powerful character she is. In fact, I think if you think about it, we're going to see the post-credit scene in not too long, and we see the characters who end up being the Guardians at the end of this movie. They are all incredibly powerful, not just not minorly powerful. I think Cosmo, Kraglin with the arrow, of course, is incredibly powerful once she learns to wield it.
Sire, we must retreat. The ship is going down.
The spaceport has intruders.
Go. See if one of them is 89P13.
Sire, you have an irrational obsession with this animal. You must stop, for God's sake.
There is no God. That's why
I like taking a character like Vim, who's really a secondary character in the movie, played with such excellence by Miriam Shore, and just giving them something a little to do than just, she has choices here, and she does what I think a person would do, which is, she sees that he's going crazy. She sees that he is very likely going to be the death of all of them because he's what he's doing. And she tries to stop him. She tries to do the right thing. And she's not a hero of any sort. She's not doing the right thing for any reason other than to save her own skin and maybe the skin of others she cares about on the ship. She's definitely not confident in her decision you can tell by the shake of her hand. And she's destroyed instantly, obviously, but I think this is when things go bad, because now at this point, High Evolutionary is he's just gone insane. He's, scorched earth at this point. And everybody's going to die. And that's what makes him truly dangerous at this point. It isn't because of his power. It's because of his willingness to give up everything for the sake of getting Rocket. That's what his own ego and his need for status has caused him.
And kill the rest.
Now, again, I've sat in test audiences and watched this scene in unfinished state, but I've never watched this scene with an audience in a finished state, or this upcoming sequence, the big fight scene in the hallway. And I really can't wait to do it. It's one of the things I'm looking forward to doing most at the premiere, is sitting with an audience and watching all this. Here's one of the favorite moments. I have a great memory for this scene, and that is, number one, it was these are some of the last days we ever shot with the original Guardians, or the whole Guardians as a whole, together. And that includes Sean Gunn, who was on set playing Rocket during all this. And it was really, emotional. Every day we were shooting, we're like, oh, now we got one more scene with all of us, and that's it. But also, one of the last days, like right before we finished shooting, I had the cast over to my house in Atlanta we all had dinner together as sort of a farewell. And I showed them this scene with no visual effects in it, just them walking with the few production pieces we had, and then into the fight in the hallway, which had absolutely no visual effects. And so the cast and I all watched that scene, and they went crazy. They had such a fun time watching it, and I just can't wait to show them all. I know Palm's already seen the movie, Bradley Cooper's already seen the movie, but that's it so far. So I can't wait for everybody else to see it. This was an incredibly complex scene to shoot. This is really a lot of the thanks. My gratitude goes to Wayne Dalglish, who is one of our stunt coordinators, who really, this was his biggest piece. And we worked together on this for a long time, trying to put together, a fake oneer. A oneer is doing something in one shot, and this is a fake oneer because it's really many, many pieces that we shot over a few days. But putting this together, and really, it's a time we get to see the Guardians all together fighting, and it's something that we don't get to see that often, if at all. Not all of them together at once like this. And so this was a fun scene, fun to shoot. But we had a great time shooting it, and a great time cutting it together. Weta did amazing visual effects for this in particular, with Nebula's head flying back. It's just the best. And of course, much gratitude to the Beastie Boys for giving us the rights to use this song, not only in the movie. Oh, there's Blurp trying to be helpful. He seems to be thinking he's doing something, but he's just jumping on a guy who's already hanging there. But the Beastie Boys, who gave us the rights to use the track and to put the rights to use it on the soundtrack, which is something they normally don't do. So I'm really grateful to them. I'm a big fan of the Beastie Boys, so it's really cool to get to use a song. And it's a song very unlike other music we've used in the Guardians of the Galaxy. So we sort of see the evolution of music through the eyes of the Guardians and through the eyes of Peter Quill, who only knew 70s music as a child, and then gets his zune with all these other songs on there and sort of falls in love with other types of music. Blurp gets tough here. Watch this. Yeah, there he is. He takes the credit. I think this was the last scene I shot with all the Guardians We shot this late at night on like a Friday night, and then we all started crying. And we have pictures of us together. I didn't cry very much, but the rest of them all sobbed like little tiny babies. I just got one little manly tear in the corner of my eye, and the rest of them were sobbing profusely. Ugly cry faces from Peter Quill and so forth, or Chris Pratt. That's Sarah, the other little girl there. She was one of the primary little girls we cast. And she's a great little kid and just really fun little actor. This is me. This is my character, Lambshank. It's a she. I don't know why she's a she, but she is. And that's what I see when I look in the mirror in the morning. So it's a very accurate self-portrayal, sort of a self-portrait, you might call it, Lambshank. She's fantastic. I can't wait to record her further adventures in the MCU. Trilogy, maybe, would be good. Flectic. I didn't even talk about Flectic. Flectic is my buddy Pete Davidson, and that's not just Flectic. That's not just Pete Davidson's voice. That's actually Pete Davidson standing there with the alien CGI head over his own. And you might ask, why would you put Pete Davidson in a movie, big star, and then cover up his head? But the truth is that Pete's a friend of mine. He wanted to come down and hang with us doing Guardians 3. He came to set. We shot a whole scene with him between him and Peter Quill. And it stopped the flow of the action too much and just stood out too much like, oh, we're putting Pete Davidson in our movie. So we had to drop the scene. Which maybe we can put somewhere. You can see it at some point. But we had to drop it from the movie. And so we just had this like 2 shots of Pete Davidson saying, hey, wait. And it just was so weird. It took the audience out of the movie so much that I had to call Pete and say, Pete, do you care if actually Simon Hatt, our executive producer, who's been my partner on these movies from the beginning, had to call Pete and say, I made Simon do it, who's also good friends with Pete, so it wasn't odd. Had to call Pete and say, hey, what do you want to do? Is this okay if we put a CGI head on you? And he's totally chill. He's like, yeah, that's fine. Sorry, Pete. Again, this stuff is really hard to shoot because we had this set, which is a totally different set than that set that we're looking at over there. We had to shoot them separately. They're always moving together separately. And so everything had to be completely planned out as we shot it. And so they're picking them up from one side and putting them down on the other. So that's the B side of the set. And the other side is the A side of the set. Now, I know that people go to see this movie, and one of the big things was everybody thought the Guardians were going to die in this movie, and they don't. And that's the twist, really. I don't know if everyone's going to know that. You know, that's going to be spoiled for everybody online before they go to see the movie. But they think somebody's going to die, and nobody dies. It really is a joyful ending.
He says everyone deserves a second chance.
Okay, I got to say something about this. There's this line in there about everybody deserves a second chance, and that was in the script from the very beginning. And I think it's a really emotional thing for me, knowing what we all went through to get to this point to make this movie. Nebula being a very big jerk, yelling at children, but carrying one on her back. So this is the center of the movie to me. This is the thing that I think is sort of the real true culmination of the 3 Guardians movies is this moment. This is Rocket facing who he really is. Another beautiful score by John Murphy coming in here. As he recognizes the place that we see in the very first scene of the movie where the baby raccoons are and going towards them. We have all the other animals in there, that including a CGI version of Simon Hatt's dog, River. My buddy River. And so here we have the little raccoons, and there's a little runt there, just like Rocket was. Rocket was the runt of the litter, actually. And takes the key, which he created for his friends to save them. That never really fulfilled its purpose. And it fulfills its purpose here. And then we look over, and Rocket sees where he came from, which is Earth, and that he is indeed a raccoon, the thing that he's denied being for 6 movies, which was another thing that I've been pretty when the Guardians went off in different directions, you know, there's a lot of it I let go of, but with Rocket, he was incredibly important to me. So I was always really clear with the parameters of where the character could go. And here to me, it's even a little bit more emotional where he drops the baby raccoon. Now he's saving his own kind, he's saving himself, right? But here he looks around and he sees all the other animals and realizes he is all of them and he is all of us, and that every life in the universe has purpose and has meaning. And it's a complete and spiritual transformation in a character that started out as completely selfish.
You thought you could escape me.
And then the final vestige of the high evolutionary coming in with his ugliness and his anger and his rage and his pettiness and trying to destroy Rocket, knowing the spaceship is exploding around him as he does. That's more important to him. And Rocket says who he is.
8, 9, P, 1, 3.
The name's Rocket. Rocket Raccoon.
I remember writing this, not writing the scene, I remember editing the scene one day, and I just started laughing, and I texted Kevin Feige, and I said, do you realize that we've spent 10 years and over $500 million making movies that are really just the origin for why a character is named Rocket Raccoon? So there's a very spiritual element of it, and there's this other element that's just very whimsical, shall we say. This is, now maybe I'm sick, but I laugh every time I see this stuff. Now this, we had to make an actual Chuck face that we put on our stunt guy so that he could fall down. So we had this Chuck face that we put on another person, and it was so weird. It was so weird. I got to post pictures of that. But here, that is just really awful. And this is sort of inspired by, there's a moment in the comics where High Evolutionary, we see his face, and it's like this horribly misshapen thing because he's been doing experiments on himself. And the origins of it here are much different than they are in the comics, but it is inspired by that.
Because I'm a freaking guardian of the galaxy.
And there we sort of see, you know, Rocket's compassion even goes to the one who tortured him. He even goes to the one who tried to destroy him. He feels sorry. I think Rocket feels sorry for High Evolutionary. Now, there was a scene cut from the movie that I'm sure will be in the extras on the DVD and so forth where, oh, here we have the stampede. Again, Rocket's saving all of the animals. There's a scene in the, you know, that we cut with Rocket putting High Evolutionary in prison. And in fact, in this scene, if you really look and you freeze frame, you can see that Drax is carrying, I think it's Drax is carrying the High Evolutionary. So the High Evolutionary does survive. He does live. They don't just leave him back there to die. Drax carries him into the other ship and they save his life. And at the end of the movie, in the deleted scenes, we see Rocket Raccoon, you know, locking up High Evolutionary and just walking away from him. And it's a really great scene. It just, we didn't need it because I think we tell the story. Here we have him going back to get the Zune, which I think by this point he actually knows he's going to give to Rocket.
Quill! Hurry!
And here we have this moment, which, you know, I was talking about earlier, how people went into the movie thinking, it seems a lot of people thought that people were going to die in this movie because it's the last Guardians, but it's just because some of the actors are done playing the characters, you know, and I had different plan for different Guardians and the characters to go in different directions, and that's really what it is about. And I'm leaving, you know, I'm not doing another Guardians. There are no plans, at least now. But I think that people thought all sorts of different characters, and this does seem to be the one that when audiences watch the movie, they actually do think that Peter Quill is in mortal danger here. This was not visual effects. That's practical effects. That's a real mask that Chris was wearing. It wasn't very comfortable, and white contacts over his eyes. That's real. And then we actually have the second Michelangelo Easter egg here from the Sistine Chapel, and the other one is the Pieta from the Vatican at the beginning with Adam Warlock on her lap. But I wouldn't read too much into it. It's just fun visuals. But I think it just, you know, it is there is a recurring theme in the Guardians of these characters that are kind of jerks finding something beautiful in themselves, and that every person, you know, no matter how bad they may seem, maybe not every person, but most people, no matter how bad they seem, have something good within them, have something, are able to love, are able to add something to the world and other people. And maybe if we all just approach the world with a little bit more compassion, a little bit more forgiveness, if each of us did that individually, we'd be in a better place. And maybe we're in a better place than we think we are. And I love this moment here with Adam Warlock. So that's actually Will standing there looking at them, and then on the microphone I go, Will, go join in the hug. Go join in the hug, because he wasn't planned to join in the hug. And then he walked over and hugged them and did the hug, and it was really funny when it was on set, and then when I watched it in the cut, I was actually very moved by it, which was different. I want to talk about this scene. This scene's important to me because this is a scene that I don't think people necessarily understand, that Groot, his mother, is Gamora to him in his eyes. We see baby Groot and how much Gamora loves him in volume 2 and how much he loves her. Like, that is his mom. And so there's a particular sadness here where she doesn't remember him. That to me is one of the saddest things in the entire movie, that, you know, your mother doesn't know who you are. And it's just such a small moment, and where she understands him suddenly, and it's nice. And then this scene also, great score by John, fantastic performances by Zoe and Chris. Really, the life here. And I think it even says in the script, she stops here and realizes the life she lost that she never had. And she feels that loss of the thing that she never knew. And he feels it fully because he did lose it.
You wouldn't believe.
That line, you wouldn't believe, Chris, gets me in the heart every time. And the sisterly grunt. And the difference here with Nebula, who's able to be so compassionate to Peter Quill, who she's known as an adult when she's a little bit more evolved, and her sister, who she just grunts at, even though she's her sister.
Ever since. I'm going to need to take some time. Learn how to swim.
I as well.
I think Mantis is telling the truth here. I think that she's never really experienced life. You know, she is in some ways the child, you know, because she's started out as, you know, Ego, sort of his slave, really, even though she's his daughter. But he didn't care about her, and she was like his slave. And then she went and she joined this family, and she kind of defined herself based on them. She keeps trying to get her thoughts and her ideas across, and I don't totally listen to her, and she's a little frustrated. But I think she needs to go out and live her own life here, and I think that makes sense. I think that Nebula's, these where we see the turns of all our characters. Nebula, her turn is being compassionate towards Drax, realizing that he was not a destroyer, he's a dad. And she takes on the responsibility of running the city, which is where she belongs. And Drax realizes that he isn't a destroyer, even calling himself Drax a destroyer, as he does so funnily earlier when he says to Ben Davis's character that that's his name. He's a dad. He wants nothing more than to be a dad. And then Peter Quill, passing on the torch to the one who's needs to be the leader, which they've argued over before, but I don't think Rocket ever took those arguments too seriously. I don't think he ever really thought he was a captain. But he did what he had to do to become a leader, and that's where he is at the end of the movie. And
I love you guys.
And that's something that people have talked about in the theater. And now when Groot says, I love you guys, what is that? Does he speak? Is that the first time he's speaking English? I'm like, no, we need to get to know somebody before we understand. We need to get to know Groot before we understand him. You need to be let into his circle. And for me, that's about us all being let into the circle of the Guardians. We're all Guardians, and we're a part of that family. And people go and they see these movies and they become attached to these characters, and these characters remind them of themselves. They remind them of their friends and their families and the people they love. And that's Groot letting us all in. We all belong. Florence and the Machine, a much newer song, of course. I think truly probably one of the 3 or 4 greatest pop songs of the past 20 years. A beautiful song, and I think a great song to go out on. Boy, there was so much stuff we shot for this that we couldn't use. This is me dancing as Groot, as I've done in all the movies and the special. That's me. And then Sean's dancing as Rocket here in a second. And this was really, for me, maybe the greatest moment I've ever had on a movie set. My brother and I grew up in Manchester, Missouri, and we played and pretended and talked about dreams, and then the two of us dancing there on this set in front of everyone together, creating this story and playing and creating just like we did when we were little kids. There's no difference between it. Just now we have hundreds of millions of dollars riding on our dreams and our pretend. And it was a real emotional moment for me and Sean. And I know that there was a lot of tears in the crowd that day in general. There was something so electric and special. Here we see Gamora being with the family she really has, that she was telling Peter Quill the truth. She loves this family. She's found a family, just like the other Gamora did. But it's this group of characters, including Alan Gale there as a beardy Ravager, and Mainframe and Kruger, so cute, hugging him. These kids were so fun, man. Oh my God, we had fun these days. Yeah, Nebula just laughing, and Ravager Jig by Kraglin there. And then I think of what's the other sort of key ending here. Another one of them is Peter Quill here going back to the place he ran from at the very beginning of the first movie. He's out of his childhood. He's an adult. And he's accepting the bonds that he has with people that you can't cut off, you can't change. And there's Meredith, his mom, Wyatt, who played him as a kid. And then, of course, Greg Henry, who played Grandpa Quill in the first movie. We can see him in a little tiny spot in the second movie, saving a woman or not getting crushed by a car. And then here he is. Greg Henry giving his grandson a hug, recognizes him immediately, which I always find very moving, that he just instantly knows who that is, even though he's been gone for, almost 40 years. And here's Drax, who says that he doesn't dance. In fact, he's divided the whole world by dancers and non-dancers, and that's what he cares about. Says he fell in love with his wife because she didn't dance. And then he learns how to dance. It's in all of us. And he's doing it for those kids, too, which is the best. The kids want him to dance because he's the greatest dad in the world. Well, I like those penguin down here dancing and looking at people and just pure joy. Everybody thinks it's going to be a sad ending, but it's not. And there's just... Oh boy, it's not easy to talk for that long sitting here by myself, but I really appreciate you guys listening to me. I guess I'll talk through these end credits, which another few minutes. There's Nick Corda, who's been our executive producer. Lars, who's been my first AD in the past few movies. Really important people in this. The sound guys from Skywalker, David and Cheryl and Chris and Gary, they were wonderful partners. Fantastic. All of them. David and Gary and Cheryl and Chris, they're just great. There's our cast in order of appearance, including a few little surprises in there, and my nephew Will and my niece Grace. And I wanted to do something at the end. This is The Replacements, one of my favorite songs by one of my favorite bands, The Replacements. I like getting these bands I love into the movie at the last minute. Bruce Springsteen in a second. And then here we have, the introduction of the Guardians of the Galaxy, which are the new Guardians. And as I was saying a little bit earlier, I think that this is a really powerful group of characters. There's Fila, of course, Kraglin now is able to wield that arrow. The incredibly powerful Adam Warlock and Cosmo. And this is sort of an upgraded Guardians 2.0. I think that they are pretty much can face against world powers. I still don't know exactly what Blurb thinks he's doing, but they brought him along, which seems incredibly dangerous for a pet. Also incredibly dangerous for a child, but she's got incredibly powerful superpowers that we see show up at the end. And of course, we go back to Come and Get Your Love, the song from the very beginning of the first movie. The first pop song we heard is the pop song we hear last or second to last. Oh, and of course, we have big ol' Alpha Groot here at the end. And we kind of see again for sure this Groot is not the same as the Groot we saw in the first movie. He's obviously developed very differently from that Groot, not a clone, his child. Here, I think Rocket's just sort of reflecting on everything that he's been through and what these people mean to him, who he is, where he's going, and he flies off with his little jetpack. It's pretty cool. So I really wanted to have a way to acknowledge all of the other movies that we've been through with the Guardians here. This is the ending of this era, and so we decided to do it through these photographs that we have throughout the end. And we see different moments and memories. They've all been picked mostly by me to get, just the things that really mean the most to me, whether it's Quill and Gamora dancing or, Groot and his spores here from the first movie, that magical moment. One of my favorite moments, the first movie where Groot touches Groot with his thing as Groot's eyes fill with tears and he sacrifices his life for him. First appearance of Stakar with Yondu, Sylvester Stallone, a day that I was incredibly emotional and because I had to give direction to one of my heroes, very difficult. Quill and Mantis discovering their brother and sister, and then all the great people here that worked on the movie. Just so many people put their hearts and souls into this. They really do care about the Guardians, and it's the thing I get again and again from the people in visual effects, the people in makeup, the people in the offices. They love the Guardians, and they love putting themselves into this movie, and I really do hope that all of the people on here know how much I appreciate all of them, and each one of them is a part of this movie. There's nobody on here who didn't work hours and hours and hours and hours sometimes on this movie. There's Stan Lee. You know, incidentally, the character of Lambshank. Oh, here's my favorite moment, actually. One of my favorite moments is Kraglin shouting at the end of Volume 2. But I originally wrote Lambshank, the character that I play, for Stan Lee, because I wrote the movie before Stan passed on, and I knew he was also getting much older, and it would be hard to bring him to Atlanta to shoot. So I did a character that I could just animate and then have him do the voice and have a little Stan Lee like face on that character. But unfortunately, Stan passed, who I really enjoyed working with and directing so many times as we went through these movies. Here we have Badlands by Bruce Springsteen, another song of hope, and what a great song to end our trilogy on, to really go out with the boss. Look at those names, all those people. Man, it's amazing, right? Sony Pictures Imageworks did a lot of the stuff on the Orgoscope. They did a good job. The first moment Quill and Gamora met each other from the first movie we see here. Baby Groot dancing from the second movie. So I think I got teary-eyed about 3 times during this director's commentary. It'll be interesting to see if people know which times those were. Did my voice crack? Did I, give myself away or not? Kurt Russell, another hero I was able to work with on this series. Him, Glenn Close, Benicio del Toro, John C. Reilly, so many really fantastic actors that we got to work with over the years. Lee Pace there as Ronan. What a wonderful guy he is. We've always had a rule here on the Guardians movies that we won't work with jerks. And I think I have successfully, don't ever remember. I remember one jerk in the entire process, which was a guy in but that's the only jerk we've ever really, the major jerk we've ever had. Other than that, all of our actors have been fantastic. And, as I say that, of course, one of the best comes up, Kevin Bacon, who I worked with on Super, worked with on the holiday special. Just one of the greatest guys you could ever work with. Really, just for real. He's just the best. Company 3 did a lot of our digital internegative, the color on the movie, in which we took a lot of risks with this film. We didn't go with the usual look of a Guardians film, or even the usual look of a Marvel film. It's a different kind of color scheme, and I appreciate that. And there's my mom and dad. My dad passed away a couple years ago. This film is dedicated to him. That's my mom. She's still around. She's going to be happy to see herself in the movie. I think. I don't know. She doesn't care. My mom doesn't care about stuff like that. My dad would be tickled pink. Baby Groot in the pot. There's Gamora and Nebula hugging. Another one of my favorite moments in the movies is where Gamora hugs Nebula and she doesn't know what to do. And she just, with one hand, reaches around and hugs him. And then we have the whole gang together here at the end. Great picture. Oh, but not quite over. We always want to give somebody a little something special. And Chris and I forever have talked about how great it would be able to do a legendary Star-Lord movie story with Star-Lord on Earth trying to adapt to the environment of Earth in the same way somebody else might try to adapt to the alien environment of outer space. And he's a fish out of water in just kind of regular water. So I can't wait to see it. Anyway, I love you all. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Love you.